I couldn't believe my eyes. Caroline, my partner of 4 years, was bare-chested and sitting on another man's lap in the hot tub. They were clearly involved in intimate activities. I was fuming with anger. I quickly recorded a short video on my phone, even though I'd thought about changing into swim trunks. I decided against it, though, and sat in the room instead, trying to figure out why she hadn't wanted me at the party. Caroline had been working as a secretary for about a year at an air fund, a hedge fund company. She'd always seemed genuinely. She was happy in her job now, but I found out why earlier that week. I saw a text on her phone about a company Christmas party with a +1 invitation. When I asked her about it, she tried to stop me, saying she didn't want to talk about finance. I asked her why, and she said she was embarrassed to be seen with me. She explained that it wasn't about embarrassment, but rather the dull conversations about money at the event. The monthly parties hosted by her company were typically, it was for staff only, which meant Caroline often had to stay late or even the next day. I'd never made a fuss before, but I'd gained insight into what went on at these gatherings. I replied with a resigned acknowledgement. She then said that if I went, I should make sure my tuxedo was cleaned. However, she warned me, saying she doubted I'd enjoy the event on the day itself. She suggested I bring swim trunks, and I asked if that was appropriate for a December Christmas party. She explained that the parties usually, the main event ended up at her boss's penthouse, which featured a nice hot tub. I acknowledged her revelation, and she confessed that this was pretty much a regular occurrence. She then asked me to promise to behave impeccably that night, to which I assured her that I always do, though my tone of voice might have hinted otherwise. Curious, I questioned why she was sharing this information with me. She explained that these parties could sometimes get out of hand, and she didn't want me to be caught off guard, mentioning that some of the men there could be overly familiar. She said that as long as everything passed the husband test, there shouldn't be any problems. In response, she just smiled and kissed me on the cheek without saying a word at the main party. At the party, Caroline introduced me to her friend Gabriella, introducing me as her husband. Gabriella smiled at me and asked about the term husband, implying that the night was going to be entertaining. She said that Caroline was a lively and adventurous woman. I glanced at Caroline, who responded with a playful smile and giggle. She said she needed to mingle and asked Gabby to join her. They got some drinks, specifically requesting wine, and left without a backward glance. I went to the bar, ordered Caroline's wine, and got myself a beer, even though I'd scanned the room and couldn't see her. I looked for her but couldn't find her. After half an hour, I sat at an empty table, hoping she'd come looking for me. I watched the lively dance floor, feeling overlooked as people passed by me as if I were invisible. It seemed like she was right. I wasn't enjoying myself. I was getting pretty frustrated. My wife had been nursing my beer for a couple of hours, and I was starting to feel like she'd deserted me. I decided to call it a night. If Caroline wasn't going to spend time with me, I'd head home and leave her to enjoy the company of her friends. I made my way towards the exit and saw Caroline and Gabriella approaching, accompanied by 3 other men, one of whom had his arm around Caroline's waist. Caroline skipped the formalities and greeted me with a kiss. I tasted tequila on her lips, along with something else. I told her I was leaving because she'd been alone for 2 hours. I asked where she'd been. Caroline blushed and avoided eye contact while the men smirked. I didn't want to confront them, so I let it go. Gabriel explained that they'd been taking shots. Caroline seemed confused by Gabrielle's explanation, so I asked her about the shots. I noticed the taste of tequila and something else. She said it was just tequila, but I wasn't sure. I asked her if she was ready to go. She said she was. I said I was ready to go and asked if I'd get to spend some time with her or if she was planning to leave me again that night. She said not to be silly and that I'd see her later. She decided to ride with Gabriella and the men, so Jesse said it was fine for me to follow. I suggested that she ride with me, but one of the men grabbed her hand and pulled her away, which made me even more annoyed. They left with Caroline and Gabriella trailing behind the men laughing. I got into my car and followed them. She rode with me, but one of the men grabbed Caroline's hand and pulled her away, which really annoyed me. They left with Caroline and Gabriella following behind the men, laughing as they went. I got into my car and followed them. When I arrived, I saw Caroline in a bikini. When we got to our destination, she was already in the hot tub with 2 men. I later found out they were Lucas and Henry, the senior partners in the firm. They seemed like wealthy frat boys. After they went outside, Gabriella approached me and asked if I thought we could meet up later that night. I responded by questioning what gave her the impression I would be interested, emphasizing my marital status. She seemed surprised, citing Caroline's interactions with other men, especially the way Caroline had kissed me earlier. She seemed to believe we had an open marriage. I was confused by Gabriella's question about Caroline's earlier kiss. It turned out that Caroline had already been intimate with Lucas and Henry. I was shocked and felt sick. Gabriella realized my shock and said, "Oh, I hadn't known, had I?" I admitted I hadn't and asked how long this had been going on. Gabriella told me it had been happening since Caroline joined the company over a year ago. I was pretty shocked and had to think about it for a moment. Realizing Caroline had been involved with, I was shocked to realize that she'd been involved with 2 men and several others the entire time without my knowledge. Gabriella confirmed that Caroline had been involved with 2 men and several others. She also said that Caroline genuinely loved me, which I found hard to believe. Gabriella suggested I go upstairs and change, hoping Caroline would keep herself in check with my presence. I didn't think that was a good idea, but I went upstairs anyway. That's when I caught sight of her with those 2 men. Despite my feelings for her, I found the scene difficult to watch and decided to speak to her as I went downstairs. Caroline greeted me, asking why I wasn't in my bathing suit and if I was going to join them in the hot tub. I took her arm, led her into a nearby room, and closed the door behind us. I asked her if she had ever planned to tell me about our open marriage. I told her what Gabriella had said and showed her a video on my phone of her with the 2 men in the hot tub. I pressed her further. I asked for an explanation. I was thinking that maybe she wanted to make my life even more difficult after leaving me at the party. Karen said that they were just having a good time and that it didn't mean anything. I was shocked and told her that I didn't agree. I also told her that what she did was very wrong. I took off my wedding ring and gave it to her. Then I took off her rings from her left hand. She asked me why I was doing this. I told her that I found her behavior disgusting. I gave her a sarcastic Merry Christmas and told her I was going to see a div whore warrior on Monday. I also told her not to bother coming home, even though she kept asking me to come back. I stayed calm and said I wasn't interested and that I made it clear that I was aware of the truth and understood why she had kept me from accompanying her on one last goodbye to Caroline. I left, leaving one of the men uncertain, calling out to me, questioning my abrupt departure and complimenting Caroline. I replied casually, saying that she was now their responsibility, and left the penthouse, going down to the ground floor. I went to my car and drove home, ignoring Caroline's calls and texts. When I got home, I ignored her attempts to contact me. I deleted her messages and changed my number, then grabbed some trash bags and started collecting her belongings, tossing them into the bags and loading them into her car. I pulled it out of the garage, removed the garage door opener and changed the access code, making sure she couldn't reach. By this time, it was around 2:45 a.m. I was really tired, so I went to bed. I fell asleep almost instantly. The next morning, I was woken up by the phone ringing. I picked it up and it was Caroline on the other end. She asked me to pick her up, but I told her that wasn't my concern anymore. She tried to start a conversation, but I said I wasn't interested. I told her that any further communication should go through my lawyer. I also informed her that her car was parked in my space, packed with her belongings. Despite her immediate call back, I hung up. I disconnected the house phone, not wanting to face her or hear her voice again. I collapsed back onto the bed and drifted back to sleep. When I finally woke up enough to think straight that afternoon, I plugged the phone back in. I glanced outside and noticed that her car was no longer there. I thought to myself, good. I thought maybe she finally got the message. I turned to the internet and began searching for a divorce lawyer to educate myself on the divorce laws in our state. It was a community property state, but since we didn't own any real estate, that wouldn't complicate matters. There were no children between us, so child support wouldn't be an issue either. Given that she earned as much as, if not more than me, I doubted there would be any alimony involved. Further research revealed that while most divorces in our state, I learned that while most divorces in our state are no fault, there is a provision to file based on grounds such as infidelity, cruelty, or misuse. This could potentially make the divorce process more expensive and lengthy, but I wasn't concerned about that. After my search, I made a note of the number for Gonzalez, the attorney at law, intending to give her a call on Monday while jotting down notes. My cell phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. I decided to answer it, as it could be Caroline or anyone else. I heard a female voice introduce herself. As Gabriella told me that Caroline was staying with her for a few days, I decided to go ahead with the divorce. Gabriella was really worried about Caroline, saying she was upset, staying in her room, and on the verge of a breakdown. I told her I didn't care, and that Caroline had brought this on herself. She asked if I still had feelings for Caroline, and I told her I hated and despised her. I told her how Caroline had treated me over the last year. She also said that Caroline had been unfaithful to me for a long time and had publicly humiliated me, which made me think that our relationship was over. Gabriella said that Caroline still loved me, but I wasn't sure. I asked her what Caroline had done before we ended the call. I wanted to know what had happened after I left and during their stay at the penthouse. Gabriella said that they had all met up to talk to Caroline after I left. She said that I could have had a nice evening if I had stayed. I told her I didn't believe her and questioned her integrity. Then I hung up. After that, I got 2 text messages from numbers I didn't know. I'd slept through them, but when I checked, I saw videos attached. One of them said, "Missed one hell of a party, bro." I played the video and saw Caroline having sex with 3 men at the penthouse. Lucas and Henry were in it, but I didn't recognize the third guy. In the first video, a man I didn't recognize looked into the camera and said, "What a hot wife you have." Then he added, "A pity you're not here." The second video was similar, except Caroline said to one of the men, "It's so big, give it to me quickly." She was looking at the camera with a grin. I felt even more disdain for her. I transferred the videos to my PC and made a copy for the lawyer. I thought about sending the videos to all of her friends and family, but decided against it. At the time, I read on Emma's website that I needed to be careful about how I reacted to her actions. If I was negative, it could easily affect my case, so I decided to wait and see for the rest of the day. The next day, I heard nothing from Caroline or Gabriella, which I saw as a good thing. I spent the rest of the weekend getting rid of Caroline's things from the apartment. On Monday, I spoke to my boss about what was going on. I also asked for a short leave of absence. My boss, who had also gone through a divorce due to an unfaithful partner, understood the emotional impact of the situation and supported me. I quickly reached out to Emma's office and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. On my way to the appointment, I visited the bank to start separating our accounts. I settled our joint credit card and then canceled it, withdrawing half of our assets to open a new account in my name only. Emma explained the divorce laws in our state to me during our meeting. She suggested we sue Caroline's employers for alienation of affection, even though I didn't think there was much chance of winning. I asked her to serve the papers at their office so they'd get a taste of the public humiliation they'd heaped on me over the past year. I made arrangements with Emma and paid her a retainer. On my way home, I got a call from Gabriella. I was a bit hesitant at first, but she suggested a meeting with Caroline that afternoon. However, I declined, following my attorney's advice to maintain distance. Gabriella offered Caroline's contact information after consulting with someone. I provided Emma's details instead. Despite Gabriella's attempts to advocate for Caroline, I firmly rejected any possibility of forgiveness. I told her that Caroline could anticipate after the call. I went home and stopped at the store to get beer and cigarettes. I'd quit smoking, but I felt like I needed to do something to prevent destructive behavior. When I got home, the phone rang, and I recognized the voice as Lucas Russell, my wife's boss. I answered, and he spoke in a more professional tone than the other person on the call. He was more respectful, too. I was pretty upset about what happened on Friday. He said they'd assumed I was fine with my wife's activities at company gatherings. I asked if he knew she was married, and he said yes, but that Caroline had told them we had an open marriage, so they thought it was okay. I said he should have checked with me and asked about the videos they sent me on Friday night. He admitted to sending them and apologized. He said he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to make it up to me. I told him what I wanted and said I was going to take legal action against him. I also said I was going to sue him for alienation of affection. I told him that if he really wanted to make it up to me, he should accept my terms without arguing. He asked if I was really thinking about suing them. I said I was. He said they'd broken their own moral rules over the past year, which had led to the breakdown of my marriage. He said it was just harmless fun and that they never meant to harm my marriage. I asked him what he expected, saying I wouldn't praise them for what they'd done. He said we could sort it out together and that he was worried the lawsuit would ruin them. I said that wasn't my problem and ended the call, getting a beer before heading out. I went out to the balcony for a smoke. I didn't hear from them until Wednesday, when they were served at Caroline's office. Gabriella was really surprised at what I'd done. She said I hadn't given Caroline a chance to explain and that I'd made her look really bad. I just said I didn't care about Caroline's feelings after what she'd done and told Gabriella not to call again. I hung up on her a few moments later. Then I got another call from a number I recognized as coming from Lucas. I answered the office phone and he was yelling at me, threatening me with physical violence. He said I'd ruined his life and he was going to retaliate. I hung up and called Emma to tell her about the threat. She said she'd file for a temporary restraining order against Caroline in her courts today. She'd make sure I got a copy of the order, but I should remember what she'd said. Don't do anything stupid. What if he came after me? I asked. Make sure you have witnesses and don't instigate anything, she said. I replied and told her I understood. Later that afternoon there was a knock on the door. As it turned out, Emma had fed the restraining order and a courier had just delivered my copy. I thought I'd better be on the safe side, so I bought a small motion-activated camera to cover my front room. I wanted to be sure I had evidence and some means of protection. Things remained relatively peaceful for the rest of the week, thankfully. I didn't hear anything. From Gabriella Caroline or her boyfriend until Saturday night, I was sitting on my balcony with a beer and a cigarette when I heard my doorbell followed by pounding on the door. I quickly put out my cigarette and went to the front room. I looked through the peephole and saw it was Lucas with someone else. As the pounding kept up, he called me names and said I was violating a restraining order. I told him I was calling the police, but he didn't want me to. He was really insistent, so I ignored him and called the emergency services instead. When I spoke to the operator, I told them what was going on. They said they'd already received a few calls from my area and sent officers to my location. They told me not to open the door until they arrived, so I thanked them and ended the call. The pounding continued, so I braced myself and clutched the bat a bit tighter, wondering if Lucas was going to break down the door. I heard a commotion at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw two large police officers apprehending Lucas and his companion and placing handcuffs on them. After the commotion subsided, there was a knock on my door. I opened it carefully and the officer identified themselves as police. I handed them a copy of my restraining order. After reading it, the officer spoke into their radio and informed me that they would be taking Lucas and his companion downtown for the night. I explained my situation to them. The officer thanked me for my cooperation and said they were confident that Lucas wouldn't trouble me for a while. Once they left, I locked the door and went back to my balcony, cracking open a fresh beer. The news of Lucas's arrest made headlines the next day with a headline reading, "Hedge Fund CEO Arrested." Over the next few days, articles revealed that several clients were leaving due to the company's involvement in ruining employees' marriages and impacting their bottom line. I thought I went back to work on Monday, and it was tough at first, but I managed to get some work done after about 3 weeks of no contact. I got a call from Emma, who was really nice and asked how I was doing. I told her I was doing as well as could be expected. Emma told me that Caroline had got a lawyer, and they had asked the court for marriage counseling. The judge had agreed and ordered 6 sessions starting that week. I asked if they could make me go to the counseling, and Emma said. She said they could, and told me to go. She said if I didn't show up, it could lead to contempt of court and even jail. I didn't want to go, but I agreed, saying I wasn't willing to reconcile with Caroline. Emma understood, but said it was important for me to go. She said that if the counselor thought there was no hope for reconciliation, they would tell the judge. I asked if there was anything else, and Emma said that Caroline's attorney had told her that Caroline was pregnant. I was left waiting another 8 or 9 months for any legal action. I expressed my frustration, and Emma confirmed this delay. She added that if a child is mine, I would be ordered to pay child support. On a somewhat positive note, she informed me that the judge approved a legal separation until Caroline gives birth. I sarcastically commented, and Emma provided the counsel's address, wishing me luck. I resolved to make my stance unequivocally clear, There was no chance of reconciliation with the cheater. I was shown into the counselor's office by a woman who was a little older than me. She was wearing glasses and looking at me over them as Caroline sat opposite her on the love seat, looking a little down. I had a feeling that things were going to be difficult. Dr. Charles Robinson introduced herself and asked me to sit down. I chose a smaller wooden chair that was positioned at a 55-degree angle to the love seat next to Caroline. I told her I didn't want to be there, but she said she was grateful for my attendance. My attendance was then confirmed, and Dr. Robinson turned to Caroline to ask about her hopes for the sessions. Caroline said she wanted to reunite with me, citing the impending arrival of the baby and her longing to be a family. I couldn't help but laugh, and Dr. Robinson redirected her attention to me, asking about my expectations. I said that reconciliation was off the table, especially considering the betrayal. I could see Caroline recoil at my words. Dr. Charlotte nodded, acknowledging my stance. She then asked if I said I'd think about it for the sake of the child. I told her I wasn't sure if I was the father, but I'd support the child if it was mine. I said I wasn't interested in reconciling with Caroline, though, in response to her questions about the child's welfare. I showed Dr. Charlotte the videos I'd received, hoping to show how much Caroline had betrayed me. Dr. Charlotte seemed really disgusted, and as I pocketed my phone, I couldn't help but comment on her marital status. I asked how she would feel if it were her husband in those videos, emphasizing the continuous betrayal spanning over a year, even in front of her. However, she insisted that the focus should be on us and the upcoming child. I then reminded Dr. Charlotte that Caroline had a child to consider, expressing my doubts about paternity and my need for answers from Caroline. After a moment of consideration, Dr. Charlotte nodded and suggested. Caroline gave me some explanations. She looked down and seemed a bit embarrassed, but she finally met my gaze and agreed to answer my questions. Dr. Charlotte then gave me the floor to speak, so I turned back to Caroline. I asked if she knew what was going to happen on the night of the party. She confirmed it. I asked her if that was the real reason she didn't want me to go. She admitted it. When I thought about the whole thing, I told them I thought they were planning to humiliate me. Caroline reluctantly agreed. I carried on asking questions to find out if they were planning to humiliate me even more at Lucas's place. She confirmed it, looking a bit sheepish. Then I asked Caroline how long she'd been involved with the other men. She admitted it had been going on since she started working there. I was confused, so I asked her why she was doing it. She said it was fun, naughty, and exciting, and it made her feel desired. When I asked her how many men she'd been with, she said around 3 or 4. She mentioned about 3 or 4 dozen men. Excluding me, I was stunned. I asked her if she knew the father of the child she was carrying. She admitted she didn't. I confronted her about her expectations for me to raise and financially support the child. I even found myself hoping for a negative outcome. My resentment was palpable. I was really angry. Caroline and the others seemed taken aback by my words, and Caroline appeared on the verge of tears. However, I was still angry and tried to make her feel worse, sensing the tension. Charlotte tried to calm things down, but I rejected the idea that I was discarding 5 good years of marriage. I said that Caroline was the one who was at fault. I said that marriage is about 5 good years, and that the last year had lacked authenticity, especially after Caroline admitted to being involved with 35 to 40 men and was unsure about the paternity of her child. As the session was ending, Charlotte said she would have individual sessions with each of us before deciding on the next steps. We made our appointments for the following week and left the office, ignoring Caroline's calls. I went to my car and watched her leave. As I drove off, I felt a sense of satisfaction, thinking it was fitting for her to experience some emotional pain. That night I received a furious call from Gabriella, blaming me for Caroline's condition. She told me Caroline had been hospitalized due to an incident and accused me of mistreating her. I defended myself, saying I'd only spoken the truth, contrasting it with Caroline's actions over the past year. Gabriella questioned my apparent lack of concern for Caroline's well-being. I didn't respond, just brushed it off, and she called me heartless. She said I should at least give her insurance details, reminding me that Caroline was still legally my wife and I'd be responsible for the bills. I thought for a moment and decided to visit Caroline in the hospital. I acknowledged the information Emma had shared earlier. Gabriella gave me the room details, and when I arrived, I went to the nurse and gave them my insurance details and briefly discussed Caroline's. I asked the doctor about the cause of the incident. He explained the complexities of pregnancies, leaving the specific cause uncertain. I wanted to understand the timeline of the pregnancy. I learned that Caroline was approximately 8 or 9 weeks along, which left open the possibility that the child could have been mine. However, I deemed it inconsequential, viewing the incident as an opportunity to proceed with a divorce. I received assurance from the doctor regarding Caroline's well-being. When I went into her room, I could see that she was upset. Gabriella was standing at the end of the bed, looking annoyed. I told her that our relationship was over, and she asked me how much I hated her. I said that I didn't hate her as much as I did before, but that I didn't want to get back together. She'd shown she understood why I was frustrated. I told her how every time she went to the store, she'd question her interactions with the checkout clerks. I brought up the sudden change in respect and reminded her of the exceptional treatment she'd received from me throughout our years together. She acknowledged my role as a devoted husband and lover and said she'd been influenced by others. I don't know who normalizes such behavior for married couples. I dismissed her explanation, emphasizing the inevitability of divorce and the futility of salvaging the relationship. She agreed to inform her lawyer the next day. I made it clear that any hopes of friendship were unrealistic despite her apologies. I remained resolute in my decision to end the marriage. I added goodbye, Caroline. As I started to leave her room, I heard her cries behind me. Tough luck, I thought, feeling a sense of relief. A few days later, Emma called to say that Caroline had dropped all objections to the divorce. Charlotte's report echoed the impossibility of reconciliation, recommending anger management for me. The judge shared a similar sentiment but stopped short of making it a court order. Emma, about a month later, she got me the biggest check I'd ever seen, minus my fee, of course. You noted, I replied. I deposited the check and moved on, leaving behind the chaos of AF funds, or as I often thought of it, Sodom and Gomorrah. The fallout from the company's financial scandals became apparent as the company closed its doors roughly 4 months later. Clients lost trust in the company's integrity. I wondered why they'd suddenly become so skeptical. Lucas and Henry kept a low profile after their stint in jail, trying to avoid trouble. Their reputations were damaged, so they moved to the West Coast for a fresh start. Caroline and Gabriella shared an apartment and worked at a retail store in a strip mall. I saw them from time to time, but I decided to ignore them and move on with my life. I stayed single for a couple of years and started dating casually. I met Scarlett Williams, who had just divorced, and we started getting to know each other. We both had been hurt by infidelity in our previous marriages. I made sure to support her through her past hurt. We spent a lot of time together in the early days, chatting and going out for dinner and movies. I was aware of her vulnerability, so I made a point of comforting her with gestures like holding hands and going for walks in the park. Despite feeling attracted to her, I let Scarlett take the lead in our relationship. After a lovely dinner at her place, she looked at me with a curious gaze, as if she was asking if I found her attractive. I smiled and told her I found her very attractive, and that it was about more than just her looks. She was a bit surprised by my lack of initiative, so she teasingly asked if I preferred girls. My answer made it pretty clear that I was interested in women. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Please share your comments below.